Hello everyone, it's Shane Kanto, your Wasteland reviewer, and I'm here to review a goofy shark movie called 47 Meters Down. And this film is about two sisters who are on vacation in Mexico, wind up going to look at sharks in a shark cage, and it breaks and they fall to the bottom of the ocean, and now they have sharks everywhere and they need to survive. And this movie is generally pretty stupid, but for what it did a decent job. Especially because this film was technically made to go to straight to DVD and video on demand, but then somebody's like, you know what, we should probably put this in theaters. So, looking at this film is written and directed by Johannes Roberts, and this how the story is told is pretty straightforward. It does get a bit repetitive at points because it's like, okay, now they're at the bottom of the ocean, and what's going to happen now? You only have so many possible outcomes, I guess, and possible things to happen before this movie could go in one direction or another. And there is a large section of this movie. The third act of this movie is very frustrating, and I guess it depends on how willing you are to accept what happens. And I'm kind of like in the middle because I wasn't super into the movie to begin with, and there's something that happens in terms of how the story is told in the third act that's just like, okay, whatever, this movie's going there now. And in terms of pacing, it takes a little bit to get going, and then once you're there, it gets pretty intense, and there's pretty intense moments and stuff like that. But it is, as I mentioned before, a bit repetitive, and for the most, like, I never felt bored, and it was more with the writing, where it's like, when's this movie gonna come to resolution? Because I guess to go into that a bit, there's a ticking time bomb, and that's a good thing. There's their air tanks that are going to run out of air, and it's like, okay, so now I have, this creates tension, this creates intense payoff. Okay, they only have this certain amount of time before something has to happen, and you're building that point, and tension should be building as that gets closer, and that is true until they undo stuff. And there's a lot of undoing of things, and like the captain who's up in the boat, played by Matthew Modine, is basically like through their earpiece, like God above, just dropping stuff down. It's like, here I am to save the day, and it's just like, really? And it's pretty dumb movie. And in terms of the tone, overall, this is a pretty intense film, and there's a lot of great tension build up. Now, this isn't the kind of movie where the strongest point of this is the story. The big thing that's supposed to be going on in this film is the tension, the thrills, the scares of being trapped under the ocean with these sharks circling around, and those moments are pretty effective. In terms of actually hitting you emotionally, the characters are pretty flat and poorly written, so it's like I don't feel completely attached to them just as human beings. I do not want to watch these two girls get eaten by sharks. There is a particular character that is 100% a completely terrible character, and it's like, maybe I don't care so much about you, but for the most part, it's just like I only care because they're human beings. And in terms of sitting down watching a movie, it's like you want more than that. You want to be able to connect with the characters, and they're just not well written enough to get to that point. But there are moments that are very tense and eerie, and that works. The cinematography done by Mark Slick. The big thing is a lot of this is shot underwater, and that's really impressive. The unfortunate thing is whenever the sharks come in contact with something, it gets overly edited to the point of you have no idea what the hell's going on, and that's super frustrating. And overall, the camera work is very well done, except for those particular moments. And there are some moments that are just like freaky, and the camera work and the framing is done in such a great way. In terms of the effects for this film, the sharks actually looked really good. I was surprised, and for such a small budgeted film, I was actually very pleasantly surprised about how effective those sharks looked. And you don't see a super a lot, don't see them super amount in the film, but when you do, they're used very effectively, and they look like real sharks. And that's all you need to do in terms of the effects, is make them look real so that the tension is real. And in terms of now getting to the story and the characters, as I mentioned before, Johannes Roberts wrote this, but along with Ernest Riera. The story about how this is set up is Mandy Moore's character, the one sister, gets dumped by her boyfriend because she is too boring. So then let's peer pressure her into doing something stupid as she's on this boat where these guys are illegally chumming, throwing stuff into the water to attract sharks. And very obviously, this cage looks terrible and looks like it's going to fall apart. And she even mentions this. But her sister, played by Claire Holt, peer pressures her into doing this over some guys. It's such a terribly written reason for Mandy Moore to go on this vacation, because it's so demeaning and self-destructive for this character, and it's just like, and then everything else reinforces that feeling of herself, and then you're expected to feel better because, hey, look, it didn't turn out good. They all should have listened to her. It's like, no crap. But that was super frustrating. And the characters don't have a whole lot of depth, so there's not a whole lot of connection to them on more than that. It's like, you can tell that Mandy Moore and Claire Holt have good chemistry together as sisters, and they seem like they really care about each other, which is super important, because then it's emotionally affecting if something happens to the other one, which that's a big deal. But in terms of them as actual characters, they don't really stand up. And then the dialogue in this film is so much exposition just thrown at you, and they're under the water and should be conserving their air, but they just decide to talk out literally everything they're doing, and it's just like, why? And Matthew Modine's character, the captain up above, is just like, oh, just to remind you guys, if you do this, you'll get the bends. The bends is blah 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 blah. And it's just like, oh my god. The dialogue is just so badly written in this, and it's obnoxious. And overall, this film, the one really positive thing I could say about this film is the music is really eerie and very different and interesting, done by Tomen Dandy, and it has a very different vibe to it, and it makes it very tense, especially in the scenes where basically the big things that work best about this film is those moments that are building up tension when they're swimming around in the water trying to avoid the sharks, when they're swimming around or swimming away from the sharks, and basically as a monster movie creature feature, this works on some level, and those moments are really intense and get you on the edge of your seat. But if you're expecting anything in terms of characters and acting, because to be perfectly honest, nobody was great in this film either, don't expect much. So basically what I'm going to say is I'm giving this an above average rating just because of the atmosphere and the camera work and the actual tension building in this film. This film could have been so much better if you actually cared about the characters, which is why Jaws worked. Not because of the shark, it was because you really liked the characters in it. So overall, I am going to give 47 Meters Down a C+.